So today I'm going to show you how I make my hand embroidered quilt labels. And these are very special because they take a lot of time, so I don't do them for every quilt. Most of the labels that go on my quilts are machine embroidered, which is a lot easier. I just kind of have to push a button and walk away and the machine does all the stitching for me. But occasionally, like now when I have a lot of time, when I'm kind of sitting on the couch with my kids, I like to have a little hand embroidery project. So I just finished this quilt behind me and it is time to attach this label. So I'm going to take you along as I design this label on my computer, and then I'll show you how I transfer it to fabric and embroider it and then ultimately attach it to my quilt. So let's go pop over to my computer screen. I'm working in Adobe Illustrator because I have the program and I'm comfortable with it. You can do the same thing in Microsoft Word or even probably Google Documents. You're just looking for a place that you can type out the information that you want in a space, and if you're doing it in word processing software, you might have to kind of guess at what size text you are going to end up with, like pick a size font and maybe print it out and measure it, and then if you want it smaller you can just adjust the font size down a little bit. But since I can work with measurements in Adobe Illustrator, I'm going to do that. When I'm looking through my font list, I am trying to keep in mind that I'm going to have to hand embroider over these lines, so I don't want something really crazy. Something that's clear, that kind of gives me the feeling of this quilt. That's how I choose all the fonts for the patterns that I write. It's just kind of, I'll see something and it'll look right. Now that we've chosen the font and placed our name of our quilt, then I like to have a secondary box kind of below that has my name, the date, any other information you want to include in the label. Some helpful things to include are your name, your phone number, the dimensions of the quilt. If you are submitting your quilts to shows, then they always ask the dimensions and you will find yourself remeasuring that quilt a million times. This one isn't destined for any shows or anything, so I think I'm going to keep it really simple and just put the name and the date. So now it's time to decide if you want any little decorations around your quilt label. I actually have opened some of the drawings that I did for this quilt pattern, and I am just going to steal this little bit and I'm just going to insert it into our label and kind of size it so it acts like a bar right between these 2 points. So now that I have these elements all on my label, I'm just going to make sure that they are going to be centered over each other, and I think that's good. I think I love that label. So now it's time to save it and print it out, and then we will transfer it to fabric. So I have my label all printed out and I really like it. So now we're ready to move on to the next step, which is transferring it to our fabric. I'm using just white Kona cotton here. It's kind of my standard for labels just because all the thread shows up really nicely and I have a lot of it. I don't know. I just always use white. Now, my label is relatively small. I could fit this on a much smaller piece of fabric, but when I'm cutting my label fabric, I keep in mind the size hoop I'm going to use. And I want to make sure that my fabric overlaps that hoop by at least a couple inches all the way around. So now it is time to transfer our design. I'm working on a light table here. If you don't have a light box, then you can tape your label and your fabric to a bright window. You might be able to see through it if you just put it on a white surface. You don't have to have a light box by any means. Just use what you have. A sliding glass door is like perfect. So I have a couple of different utensils I like to use to transfer this design. They kind of vary in usefulness. Like I love this water-soluble marker, but it doesn't give me a fine detail line. So I kind of mix and match depending on the design that I am doing. So for like the large quilt label lettering, I might use this, whereas for the fine detail work here or my name, I might use something more like this, which is a little chalk pencil. If you would like to tape all this down so it doesn't shift on you, that's probably a good idea. I'm just gonna wing it though. So now it's just all about tracing the lines from your nice dark printer printing. I do use all marking pencils and pens that are water soluble because I'm really just not that great of an embroiderer. Can't really count on myself to cover up lines of something that won't wash away. So that's our label. It really doesn't look like much right now, but we're gonna load it into our hoop, pick out some fun colors, and I'm gonna embroider this up, and then we will come back when I am ready to trim it down and attach it to my quilt. Like a million stitches later, my little hand embroidered label is all done, and oh, don't look at the back. It's kind of a mess, but I sprayed it to get the blue marker off of it, the water soluble marker, and there's still a little bit kind of lingering on the edges, but I'm not going to worry about it too much. So the next step is to flip it over, and I'm going to take an iron and I'm just going to turn 1/4 of an inch under all the way around so that I have a nice clean kind of finished edge on my label. So the only kind of trick to doing this is that we want our corners to be nice and clean as well. So I'll show you on this corner here. So I have this little like square here on my label that I've pressed into it, and I'm just going to make a little mitered corner here. I'm going to fold those lines up, those pressed lines, until they kind of match up with their counterpart, and I'm just going to kind of finger press it, and then I am going to fold these edges in and kind of repress them so that I have this nice mitered corner to sew down. And that just will eliminate any raw edges that are kind of exposed on your label. So I'm going to go ahead and do that all the way around. So now that I have all of my corners turned under and all of my edges all set, then you have a couple of options. You could run a little top stitch around the edge just to make this a really nice clean edge, or you can just go ahead and attach it to your quilt just as it is. And that's what I'm going to do. This is kind of my secret weapon when it comes to attaching labels to quilts, and I use this stuff all the time. It is the Dritz Wash Away Wonder Tape, and it is a water-soluble double-sided tape. So you unroll it, and there's this little clear, kind of sticky, tacky surface, and you just unroll it and kind of stick it to the back of your label. Cut off what you need. And I'm going to go all the way around and put this tape on all of the edges. Okay, now that I have that all attached to my edges, I'm just going to peel away this facing, and it exposes the other side of this adhesive. Now this is not a super sticky adhesive. It is not meant to hold your label on forever. It's just to hold it in place while you stitch it down. It just makes your life a little easier. You don't have to pin it and get stuck with pins or anything like that. So now this label is ready to place, and I am going to grab my quilt and we'll stick it on there. So this is the lower edge of my quilt, so I'm actually going to stick it kind of upside down, but you can place your label wherever you like. I am just going to kind of place mine a couple inches in from the binding, and I'm just pressing that double stick tape down and folding in the edges as I go. And that, my friends, is it. Now that label is pretty securely on, and I can take my time just kind of hand stitching it down just as you do with the binding. Easy as pie. So my label is all attached to my quilt now, and it's finally finished. So I think it turned out pretty cute. I used 3 strands of embroidery floss for this kind of main title, and then just 1 for my name. And my name is definitely, it's a little thin. I might do 2 in the future, just so it's a little bit more forgiving. I'm a very beginner embroiderer. Obviously, like, this is my first attempt at satin stitch, and it is not, well, we won't get too close to it. I just sew this down to my quilt the same way I sew my binding down. You just go through your label and pick up a little bit of that backing fabric and just a little bit of the batting. You don't want to come all the way through, obviously, but I just kind of fold the edge of my quilt down above the label to kind of give me something to grab as I kind of stitch along that edge. And that wash away Wonder Tape is still in there, but it will totally dissolve the first time you wash your quilt. And even if you don't wash your quilts a lot, like, it's fabric friendly. It is meant to be used on fabric, so you don't have to worry about it just kind of living in there for a while. But if you really want to get rid of it, you could just squirt it with a little bit of water and it would just dissolve right away. So there is a download for this project available for free on my website. It's a PDF that has a blank label with some lines for you if you want to handwrite your label, if you have much better handwriting than I do. I know that I love, like, all of those handwritten notes from my grandmother and my mom, all those recipes. So it might be very sweet to have your own handwriting on a label. But in addition to the blank label, there's also a list of ideas of things that you might want to include on your label. So I will be back next Monday, but if you can't wait till then to watch another quilting video, then there are several suggestions popping up on the screen right now. And if you click on my face down in the other corner, then you'll be able to subscribe so you won't miss any future videos. So I hope you guys have a lovely week, and I will see you soon. Happy quilting! Oh.